Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Rice University and to the long-planned and long-awaited conference, Archives of the Impossible. I'm Kathleen Canning. I'm Dean of Humanities, and I'm pleased to recognize this conference as the largest, most ambitious, and most transgressive in its engagement with these authors and archives of the impossible that our school has probably ever hosted. I've been walking through the hallways with Jeff, hearing him update me time and time again. It's 700 people online. So hey, everyone out there online. It's now, I think, closer to 1,500 online, which makes me feel like, well, I've never been on TV, so we're getting close, right? The conference is transgressive in both epistemological and practical ways, and I'm sure you will be instructing us about that rather than us telling you something you already know. But contending with the impossible, with the paranormal, necessitates a search for a new critical theory, a new comparativism, as Jeff Kripal will outline in his opening remarks. And that new critical theory has the potential to defy the terms of modern and postmodern, of posthuman and transhuman. It's truly wonderful for those of us in the Dean's office to have lived side by side with the planning of this conference in our own office and now see it taking place live. It's also a declaration of our hopeful moment in which we can say, we're done with COVID. But of course, we know that may not be the case, but we have a moment where we can actually all come together. But the conference is not just taking place. That's a very neutral term. It has outgrown and overtaken the usual dimensions of academic conferences, which makes so clear that it is so much more than an academic conference. To exceed our capacities and overtake the library, the Dean's office, the hallways of the School of Humanities, with posters, flyers, archivists, filmmakers, observers. This is a tribute to the power of the humanities to engage questions far beyond the traditional confines of the humanities. And we're so pleased that this conference attests to the new humanities at Rice, which Jeff Kripal's forthcoming book actually has defined as the Super Humanities. For those of you who may not know Jeff Kripal's other life, when he is not the galvanizer of the impossible, it's my job to tell you a tiny bit about him. He's the J. Newton Rayzor Professor in Philosophy and Religious Thought at Rice, who also took on the task of chairing the Department of Religion for 8 years. He has served as Associate Dean of Humanities for the last 3 years and attended to both the visionary and the mundane in the realm of the Dean's office. That is, after all, how we might define the Dean's office, the visionary and the mundane. And he is not above the mundane, which is extremely important to us. The author of 9 scholarly books, his last entitled The Flip, Epiphanies of the Mind and the Future of Knowledge, that book appeared on the eve of COVID when he began his work in our office. It seems only fitting that his 3-year term comes to a conclusion with his study appearing in the summer of 2022 on the Super Humanities, Historical Precedents, Moral Objections, and New Realities, which will appear with the University of Chicago Press. So that's what I mean about Jeff kind of, he tells us these secrets, like I get up at 5 in the morning and that's when I do all my writing, because believe me, the email train and all the other work we do in the Dean's office, you would never believe someone could write a book on the sidelines and organize a conference like this. So in addition to his books, Jeff Kripal's published some 80 scholarly essays and another 50 creative pieces and commentaries in his role as a public intellectual. By my count from his CV, this is the 30th conference he has organized, but none has had a comparable scope or ambition. So I'd like to say on behalf of the School of Humanities, thank you to Jeff Kripal, and I'd like you all to give him a hand for actually providing this venue for this incredible exploration of the impossible. We welcome you all to Rice, and we're thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you, Kathleen. That was very sweet. And I hope true. I think it's true. I'm going to give some opening remarks here that are more technical and kind of process-oriented, and then I'm going to give a very formal lecture that's fairly brief, and then we're going to take a 5-minute stretch, okay, just to keep people, let people use the restroom and just so we can stretch. So let me begin, and I'm going to do this fairly formally because I've found that if I just blab, I say less. If I give you something formal, there's some meat there to chew on. So here are what I call my opening remarks. These are kind of setups. So I've been in the dean's office with Kathleen now for almost 3 years. She's talked about that. I've learned many things. Among them, that every event like this takes real human labor. I want to begin this evening by pointing you all to pages 5 and 6 of the conference booklet. Those listings of names there are not performative. They are not empty gestures or filter. The simple truth is that none of this would have happened without all of these individuals, from Kathleen and her office's generosity, through Elias Bongba and the Department of Religion staff, Elaine Sanchez and Diana Hurd, and Amanda Foki and the Woodson Research Center, to the media magic of John Waterhouse, Eric Granquist, Chia Lang, Jeff Cox, and Dean Mackey, to Gail and Bradley Husick, who have done so much to help make this conference a genuine work of social art, to the material donors themselves, without whom there simply would be no Archives of the Impossible. All of these people gave of their time, their expertise, their resources, and in many cases, their life works. To say that I am grateful is a fantastic understatement. I will not go through all the names here. I cannot. I will certainly miss someone, but please give them your special attention. You will see most all of these individuals among you over the next few days. Look for their name tags. Please thank them. Please be aware that we are here making the impossible possible because of their work. Let me also thank a very special place that is not formally present here, but has nevertheless helped immeasurably in assembling this team of speakers, and certainly these ideas. The Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California. Cameron Deason-Hammond asked me the other day how many of these speakers I first met or invited to Esalen. I was stunned to count the numbers. Michael Murphy, who could not be with us, along with Christina and Jim Grote, who are happily here, have been generous beyond measure to these impossible ideas and their possible practices over the last 6 decades. People, after all, do not just want to talk about these ideas. They want to practice them, realize them, become them. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, Christina and Jim. Finally, we are finally here in Houston at Rice University. Thank you all for coming, either digitally out there in the world or right here on the back end of a pandemic surge, no less. In a moment, I will deliver a few opening remarks, which will take no longer than 30 minutes. Then Learned Foot, one of our PhD candidates here in the Department of Religion, who along with Timothy Grieve Carlson and Anna Sparberg, have been with me from the beginning of this project. We tried to host this 3 different times. This is our 3rd try, so we just keep trying. And then our first and originating donor, Jacques Vallée, will speak, and off we will go over the next 4 days. I am sure our conversations will stumble, and then soar, and stumble again, and then soar again. But that is all okay. Please be generous with yourselves, with us, and with one another as we venture on. As I said in a recent letter to many of you, we are here for just one little thing, to change reality itself. It is okay to mourn the loss of certainty or the end of a worldview. It is also okay to laugh at the same. It is also okay to be provoked or puzzled or just confused. Indeed, if you are not confused over the next few days, you are probably not listening. Finally, 4 sort of technical matters. First, please turn off your cell phones or silence them. You are in a theater now, and in more ways than one. This is a movie with a science fiction nervous system, no less, as John Philip Santos would say. Turns out that John is more right than any of us can probably imagine, but let us try. Also, the digital tour, there's some confusion about the digital tour tomorrow morning. That is a digital tour, and it will take place here, not in the library. So please don't show up in the library. Please show up here, and Amanda will take us through the archives. Also, please wear a mask inside for the sake of others. And again, after my talk, which will start right now, we're going to have a 5-minute stretch. Okay? All right. Are we ready? All right. Here we go. So this little talk is called On Radar and Revelation. It's a joke I often tell, which no one ever laughs at. You probably won't either. I'll explain why as we go on here. First, allow me to tell you a story of how these archives of the impossible came about. Allow me also to be what I happen to be, an academic, a professor, a nerd who loves books, strange words, and even stranger people. I do so not to be jargony or opaque or trendy. I do so to set the intellectual tone of our gathering and signal immediately where I hope some of us might yet go. Over the next few days, yes, but also over the next few years. In my own impossible hopes, these archives constitute fantastically rich historical deposits, but they are not just about the past. They are also about the future of knowledge, the future of higher education, and most of all, the future of what we too confidently call the human. These deposits, after all, suggest in 1,000 bright and dark ways that the human is not only what we have so carefully thought and so fiercely said over the last few centuries. In a few words, that the human is local, historical, and socially constructed. These deposits also point to what human civilizations have largely been about over the last few millennia and have often realized, namely, that the human is also non-local, inside and outside of space and time, in a single word, cosmic. And yes, I mean that. I'm perfectly serious. In 2010, I published an intellectual history of a most abused and most misunderstood word, the paranormal. That book was Authors of the Impossible. The paranormal, it turns out, was not born in the tabloids, but in some of the most elite intellectuals and academic locations on the planet. In figures like Alfred Russel Wallace, who co-discovered the principles of natural selection with Charles Darwin and called these phenomena spiritual or superhuman. Or Friedrich Nietzsche, who related his futurity as much to Darwin as ancient Greek polytheism, and hymned what he knew and saw as the coming superhumans, or Übermensch. Or the mid-20th century French writer Aimé Michel, who spoke and wrote of la pensée surhumaine, literally a kind of superhuman thinking. Academic institutions like Cambridge, Stanford, Harvard, Duke, Princeton, and the University of Virginia all spawned or sponsored research programs where these phenomena were variously called psychical. This is the word of the British chemist and physicist Sir William Crookes in 1887. Supernormal, the Cambridge-trained classicist Frederick Myers. Paranormal, first in French around 1903. Superhuman, William James at Harvard. And a bit later, parapsychological, the University of Chicago botanists J.B. and Louisa Rhine at Duke. The newly invented words just kept coming and coming and coming. It was as if scientists and intellectuals wanted to name something that could not be named, but that brightens at the core of who and what we have long been and will become more so. The same continues today, of course, and so here we are. I've tried my hand at this naming the unnameable. By an author of the impossible, I mean an author who writes about well-documented historical events and exceptionally common human experiences that are not supposed to happen, but do anyway. and who, by writing and theorizing about these impossible things, renders them newly plausible, imaginable, thinkable, in a word, real. I mean an author who makes the impossible possible. I featured 4 such authors in the book. One was Jacques Vallée, a French-born American astronomer, computer scientist, and investor in advanced biomedical technology, who has written numerous acclaimed books about the UFO phenomenon. Sometime in the early winter of 2014, I was with Jacques in Berkeley, California, when he asked me a question. He was beginning to worry about his research files, and he wanted to know if I had any suggestions about a university that might preserve them. I went back to Rice and contacted Woodson Research Center to see if we could host such a collection. The director at that point, Lee Pecht, was enthusiastic and asked me to approach Jacques with the possibility of sending his papers to the center. A long conversation and other visits to San Francisco came to a happy conclusion when Jacques visited Rice in March of 2016 and agreed to a major gift. I then approached another key figure in the UFO literary world with the same possibility in mind, Whitley Strieber. Whitley is a horror and science fiction writer who also wrote what is without a doubt the finest autobiographical abduction account of the 20th century, a book called Communion, which came out in 1987. Whitley also happens to be a Texan, having grown up in San Antonio just down the road. Whitley responded enthusiastically and donated thousands of letters that he had received from individuals who experienced contact and recognized their anomalous experiences in his own. Then came Edwin May. Ed was the nuclear physicist who helped to lead the U.S. government's classified remote viewing or psychic espionage program from 1985 to 1995. At one point, called Project Stargate, this was a very serious enterprise that was well funded by government agencies for over 2 decades, mostly because, as May has repeatedly argued, the remote viewers consistently obtained empirical results that were impossible to deny. Whether remote viewing was impossible or not, it worked. And it still does, of course. Some of you in this very room can speak to this much more effectively than I can. You were there. You did this. You still do this. The intellectual gravity of the gifts of Vallée, Strieber, and May created a kind of black hole effect. Soon others were attracted by their gravitational pull and approached us with their own offers of generosity, including many others whom Amanda Foke, the present director of Woodson Research Center, generously accepted into the university's archival collection. And just to list here, there are collections on scientific studies of unexplained aerial phenomena donated by Richard Haynes. There are collections on the history of ufology and the disclosure movement donated by Brenda Densler, Diana Walsh-Pasulka, Larry Bryant, and Paula Leopizzi Harris. There are collections on the history and practice of physical mediumship donated by Stuart Alexander and Leslie Kane. On the intersections between anthropology and parapsychology, donated by Stanley Krippner, and finally on popular culture and the paranormal, donated by Charles and Robert Fuller, Karen Everett, and Eric Davis. Although we have not counted them, the overall sum of the growing collection must number into the hundreds of thousands of documents, books, film, and recordings. And the sum is greater than the individual parts. The project as a whole is based on the working hypothesis that it is all connected. From the UFO and the NDE, through the poltergeist, the medium, and the afterlife, to the angel, the alien, the precognitive dream, the telepathic communication, and the abduction event. That is, after all, why all of this material sits in the same archival collection. Collecting is connecting. Collection is connection. It may not be all connected, of course, and it is indeed very difficult to separate the endless weaves and webs of physical events and actual experiences, intentional fakery and disinformation, psychopathology and traumatic inrush. Above all, it is a most severe challenge to our rationalist and scientific sensibilities to come to terms with the trickster-like or elusive nature of what many have simply called the phenomenon. As one of my Rice colleagues, Alexander Rayzor, put it so well with respect to German English Romantic literature and Enlightenment rationalism, there is often a kind of tyranny of clarity at work here. Such clarity in actual fact occludes or erases or renders invisible precisely that which we need to see. The stars, after all, cannot be seen at the brightness of midday. They are completely invisible. If we only had noon in which to see, none of us would believe that we are in fact floating in a sea of stars. But we are. Perhaps this is why one quickly becomes baffled, befuddled, and bedazzled in these archives. One is approaching midnight at noon. But that very confusion is likely part of the point of these historical deposits. Indeed, maybe it is the point. This is certainly why we need serious researchers to look closely at this material, to help us first see the sea of stars, and then to fathom how they might be all connected, to recognize, as it were, our own cosmic context. We are floating right now in outer space. But let us be aware that such a project of collecting as connecting, of comparing strange things and arriving at even stranger conclusions, is neither innocent nor neutral. In academic speak, we are working toward a new critical theory, a new comparativism that is neither modern nor postmodern, neither post-human nor transhuman. As the Duke literary critic Priscilla Wall put it so powerfully in one of our opening conversations, the phenomenon subverts every social construction, including and especially unjust and immoral ones. This is why these same impossible phenomena in 19th century spiritualism, for example, have been linked so tightly to social justice and the envisioning of new moral norms around gender, sexuality, and race. As the scholar of religion and race, Stephen Finley, has taught us over the years, this is also why African American visionaries are often so attracted and adept at esoteric thinking and ufological vision. They are psychologically and spiritually doubled, split in two by the racist absurdities of society. And so they see right through and then beyond these social fictions. Like the UFO, they hover above and outside society, even as they are also in it. And there is more. As the University of Chicago anthropologist Hussein Ali Agrama put it in another of our opening conversations, the secular assumptions of the academy are simply not adequate to the high strangeness of the phenomenon. Nor are the two certain epistemes or orders of knowledge of what we have come to call science and religion. Neither really work very well. Both need to be left behind at some point, dropped, like the too heavy gear of the California firefighters who need to escape a raging fire, but cannot if they will not drop their gear. So drop your gear, whatever that gear happens to be. If I had to crystallize these archives of the impossible down to a single sound bite, and I suppose that's why I'm standing here, I would say this. Impossible phenomena, especially of a spontaneous, crisis, or traumatic nature, constitute an awakening inside a story, an early and usually symbolically coded awareness that we are being written, and in ways that we may well want to write anew. I think this is the most common thing experiencers have told me. They say things like, it was as if I were in a novel, or it was as if I were in a movie, to which I always respond, you are. The impossible, in short, is all about dropping our gear. The challenge is that this awakening is seldom, if ever, pure or absolute. The truth is almost always expressed in symbol, synchronicity, or dream. or it is displaced in time or agency. We fear ourselves. We will not own our own spatio-temporal vastness. And so we trick ourselves into believing that what is doing this most extraordinary thing is someone or something else. We tell ourselves a story, and we think we are that story. But we are not that story. We are telling that story, and so we are also standing outside it. Allow me a deceptively simple example, one that was just told to me a few weeks ago. This one involved a friend named Rich. There's Rich. And his beloved leather hat, which you can also see in the background. Rich and I are both inappropriately fond of Bigfoot. Here is a photo of the two of us at a recent social event, actually at the home of Scott Jones, who's sitting right there. We had each worn a Bigfoot shirt to please the other, not knowing the other was going to wear one. Mine is cooler, of course. Rich wanted to tell me about the hole in his hat, though. He didn't want to talk about Bigfoot. About 6 months ago, Rich was working in his study in his New Mexico home. He's a cinematographer, that matters. As he edited behind a closed, thick door, he heard his wife, Stephanie, call out to him from the kitchen, loudly and clearly, "Bring me your hat." He found the request odd, and so yelled back ever so eloquently, "What?" Stephanie yelled again, "Bring me your hat." Like all wise husbands, Rich finally complied. He got up to go look for the hat. When he came out into the living room next to his office, there it was, sitting over a flaming candle, quietly burning a hole in it. Rich quickly pulled the hat from the fire and put it out. Exasperated, he found Stephanie in the kitchen. "What the hell? Why were you yelling for my hat? Why was it on the candle?" Stephanie looked at Rich like a crazy person. She had never said a word, much less yelled one. Now, there are many possible interpretations of this story. One might want to argue that Rich unconsciously smelled the burning leather from the next door room, intuited the danger, and got himself to act through a kind of psychological ruse. Maybe. But the smoke detector a few feet outside his office door did not go off. The smoke was minimal, and the thick door was shut tight. Much more plausibly, and certainly much more comparatively, there are in fact thousands of other similar stories in the literature that involve very precise cognitions of physical events, very much like this one. But a day and miles out, or a week and thousands of miles out, even 3 or 30 years out, and who knows how many gazillion space-time miles out. I am very much with the anthropologist Eric Wargo, who is also sitting here. The data on precognition is overwhelming once one honestly looks at it. Whatever time and so history is, it very much appears that time's experience flows from the future as well as from the past. Maybe space-time doesn't move at all. Maybe it just is all there, the past, the present, and the future, in one gigantic glass block, as Eric says. This is what many cosmologists are telling us today, and that would make a lot of sense, actually. It would render the impossible possible here. In any case, that felt backward-flowing history really matters. In Rich's case, it may have well prevented a house fire. In evolutionary terms, such a precognition was profoundly adaptive. It preserved property and life. But note that Rich could not own his own knowing, or even the skeptic's unconscious smelling. He had to hear his wife yell at him in order to act. The truth could only work through a trick. Rich is all of us. We all live in stories that we tell ourselves, that we think we are, but that in truth are simply too small and banal. We are exotic to the core. In the language of my own humanistic training, we are always caught in a myth, a story in which we were born, that is so fundamental, so obvious, and so seemingly natural that we do not realize it is a story and not the actual truth of things. Please be careful here. As Jason Josephson Storm has reminded us, the claim that one has no myth is the purest myth of all. This myth of secularism, of having no myths, is precisely the story we have to awaken in and then from now. Not so that we can finally be without myth, but so that we can live in a different myth, tell ourselves a better story, one that is more capacious, more just, more compassionate, and I would add, more cosmic. This is why some of us are no longer working in the academy under what Josephson Storm has hymned as, quote, the academy under the sign of the negative, unquote. We no longer wish to say only no, although it is terribly important to do that as well. We want to say no to all that is unjust, harmful, and deadly, but we also want to say yes to all that is positive, ecstatic, and life-affirming. We want to do both, and yet something more, as we work slowly but surely toward what I've called the Super Humanities. Again, this is not the human, the post-human, or the transhuman. This is something much more akin to what figures as diverse as Alfred Russel Wallace, Friedrich Nietzsche, William James, and Gloria Anzaldúa have called the superhuman. Something closer to what the Mexican-American filmmaker and writer John Philip Santos has so beautifully described as the time-coded archive in our blood. That is, our fantastically mixed or mestizo DNA that speaks to us as much from the far future as from the deep past. In the voice John literally heard, not so unlike Rich, I should add, we are not locked down here in the present. We are spread out through space and time. History is hyperdimensional. It is vast. So are we. I know that some of that might strike you as too hopeful, or as too positive, or as just impossible. That is your myth. But that is precisely my point. We didn't call them archives of the impossible for nothing. I like to joke that there are only two things you have to understand in order to really understand the UFO: radar and revelation. No one ever laughs at my joke, probably because it grates too much against our assumptions about the world and ourselves. But the joke is true. Engineering, astronomy, biology, medicine, neuroscience, and physics are as important as the history of religions, anthropology, history, philosophy, and literary criticism. I have spoken about such things to historians, theologians, and literary critics at Harvard, Duke, and Stanford, but I have also spoken to propulsion engineers and federal funding agencies at MIT, and sat with neuroscientists, statisticians, computer scientists, and quantum physicists on advisory boards in Europe and the US. Whatever these impossible phenomena are, and they are inseparable from gravity, space, time, contagion, genetics, evolution, justice, the human brain, predation, trauma, technology, possession, colonialism, folklore, and above all, consciousness itself. In truth, to study the impossible is to study everything. But how? How do we step back, take in all the pixels that appear to us, squint a bit perhaps, and finally make a picture pop? Many of us are frankly in denial. To speak the terms of the philosophy of science, we are stuck in a kind of linear causical physicalism, with point A materially causing point B, materially causing point C in a one-way arrow of time. As a consequence, we have no idea what to do with the most obvious fact of our existence that does not seem to be physical at all: consciousness itself. You would think the humanities might have something to say to this question. Alas, they have generally added immeasurably to the crisis. They have locked themselves down into what we might recognize as a nearly complete historicism, localism, contextualism, and constructivism. We are chained to the cave floor now by our own self-made chains, no less. As a direct consequence, we have no way of accepting, much less understanding, the reality of events that are very, very physical, and yet clearly violate our present understanding of space, time, matter, and mind. Think dreams that are obviously precognitive of the events of the next day or week or year. Encounters with dead husbands telling their wives where to find the body and why they should not mourn. Humanoids emerging out of nowhere. Implants in noses, ears, and legs. Supersexualized abductions and military radar returns in the sky. None of this makes the least bit of sense in our present order of knowledge. So to preserve that order of knowledge, we simply deny it all in a kind of gigantic intellectual, spiritual cop-out. The situation might seem dire at the moment for those who refuse the academy under the sign of the negative, but it also seems to be shifting, moving, even occasionally flipping. There is real reason for hope. The New York Times articles that Leslie Kean has co-written since December of 2017 have frankly been game-changing. Thank you, Leslie. But who really puts these UFO admissions together with Leslie's equally sophisticated work on the survival of bodily death? Who puts the UFO and the NDE together? Can we even recognize and then connect these dots? I think we can begin by admitting our own vast ignorance. That is, by admitting what we do not know and cannot know with our present ways of knowing. Is not an intellectual community, first and foremost, a community that knows that it does not know? This is how we might come to terms with what the Harvard psychiatrist John Mack called ontological shock. That is, this disturbing conviction that one has encountered something more real than real that fits no available social or social scientific model of reality, mostly because it is neither a subject nor an object. Can we wake up inside a story and recognize it as a story, as a vast and cosmic us? That's a lot, I admit. More than is appropriate for a few opening remarks. Still, I trust it is clear that I think that these archives of the impossible, and by extension, the days and evenings of this long weekend together, are finally about collecting and admitting as many dots as we can, and then seeing how we might connect them to form new pictures of ourselves on our cultural screens. The challenge, of course, is that we ourselves are dots in the pictures we are trying to see, characters in the stories we may no longer believe. One can, I suppose, fear the results, but one can also laugh. Humor, after all, is a form of transcendence. One can only laugh at something one has moved beyond or stands outside. Jacques has often said that the phenomena itself has a sense of humor, even if we do not always understand that humor. Hence the alien that appeared to the good police officer in Yahoo, Nebraska. I love this story, I think because of Yahoo, Nebraska. There really is such a place. The little alien is said to have said this to the good police officer: "We want you to believe in us, but not too much." Whether such an impossible thing happened or not, the basic message of the story has always struck me as exactly right. The truth in the trick. I hope we can listen to our apparently extraterrestrial friend. I hope we can be like the phenomenon itself, believing the stories that we hear, but not too much. That is my wish anyway for all of you dots sitting here or listening in from afar as you form the pictures we ourselves constitute and imagine that we are. May we imagine ourselves as something more now. May we form new pictures. May our program begin shortly. Thank you very much.